Good evening. Welcome to Kumbukeni, and it is another time for our chat. And with me, as usual, is my two co-hosts. Although Sister Nduku is in faraway Kenya, and so you will excuse her from time to time if technology intercedes on our behalf. Before further ado, I will introduce myself, Adesoji again, reaching you from the capital of imperialism, London, United Kingdom. I just needed to get that out of the
No, we
way
like hearing that. I really do. I enjoy hearing that.
Before I'm chided. So, without further ado, I would get my co-hosts to introduce themselves. Sister Nduku.
Thank you, Adesoji. Yes, I'm going on audio today. Sorry to the audience who wanted to see my lovely face, but you'll be hearing me so that we can have a more efficient conversation and we're not interrupted by any slow internet. But yes, it's good to be here. I'm looking forward to the conversation. Brother Adesoji is from Nigeria. I'm looking forward to the expertise and the knowledge that he brings in today on this conversation.
This is Milton Alimadi from here in the belly of another beast, the United States, New York City. Sister Nduku, you allowed something to slip by.
Oh,
The brother said, you're in faraway Kenya.
I know.
You should have taken that opportunity to say, no, you are in faraway United Kingdom and United States.
I know, you are the deserter. I'm home.
Exactly. But yeah, no, we look forward to having this productive conversation about the Nigerian elections and beyond just the election itself. I'm very tired, and I'll be frank with you, Brother Adesoji, of Africa's sleeping giant not fulfilling its potential. Because as Nigeria uplifts, so does the entire continent. So a lot is at stake, not only for Nigerians, but for the entire African world on the continent and the African diaspora. So I had to get that out too. Back to you.
Yes. And before I start the conversation about Nigeria, my home country, I would first of all have to say hello to them in languages they will understand.
Yes, please.
So it is Ndewono. So that is hello to my Indigbo brothers. Sonudezua to my Hausa brothers and sisters. Akudede Woyi to my Yoruba brothers and sisters. So yes, which brings us to the conversation as to why Nigeria takes centerpiece today. Nigeria is, as Brother Milton says, the sleeping giant of Africa, a country that boasts of a population of 200 million, supposedly targeting 250 million by the year 2030, which is just 7 years away. But a bit of background into why Nigeria is important. The country was formed following the amalgamation in 1914 of the Northern and Southern Protectorate to make the place we now call Nigeria. The idea of election or the elective principle was introduced into the country in 1922 as part of the first constitution that will grace that neck of the woods. That constitution itself limited its influence to the place that was supposedly called the British Crown Territory of Lagos. The election then was to get 3 representatives from the local population onto the Lagos Town Council. That Lagos Town Council election was won in 1923 by the party of Herbert Macaulay, considered the father of nationalism in Nigeria. His party at the time was called the National Democratic Party. His party will go on to win the election in 23, 28, and 33. The next election, which would become the first general election, was held in 1951. That was the first time election was spanned across the entire country. At that time, we then had three regions. We had the North region, the Western region, and the Eastern region. And so that election was the first. The next then was 1956, which will then be the election that will usher in the independence. Because the call for independence was made in 1954 by a gentleman named Anthony Nahoro, who moved the provision for independence. But because because the northern part of the country was not ready at the time, they said, if and when we are ready. So it followed again that in 1959, the question will then come up again, are we ready for independence? Which there was subsequent negotiation in London and in Lagos, at which it was agreed that October 1st, 1960 would become Independence Day for Nigeria. The election after independence, 1963, and the reason I'm homing on just the elections is you will see why. The election of 1963 brought in, just reaffirmed what the status quo was, because you had the Eastern region, the Western region, and the Northern region providing the candidates that, based on the demographics of the area in question. But that election itself, because it was marred by violence in the Western region, corruption at the center, would lead to the first coup in Nigeria on January 15, 1966. That coup itself would then lead into the Civil War of 1967. Why? Because following the coup, at which the Northern Premier, Sir Ahmadu Bello, was killed,
Right.
Okotie-Eboh was killed, the Prime Minister at the time, Tafawa Balewa, was also killed. It was seen as a targeted assassination of the northern leaders.
Right.
So there was reprisals, which led to a pogrom of the Indigbos being killed in the north.
Right.
Of course, there were reprisals elsewhere, but largely in the north. And that reprisal will lead to the most senior Igbo general, colonel at the time, Odumegu Ojukwu, calling for the secession of Nigeria. The secession of Nigeria could have been avoided if the tenets of the Aburi Accord. The Aburi Accord was a discussion that was held in Ghana between the federal and the eastern region, but that failed to materialize and war ensued. So following 1970, between 1970 and 1983, you had the military in place. So following the 1983 election, again, a coup happened. After that coup, the military was then in charge until 1999. There was an election in 1993, which was adjudged to be the freest and fairest election in Nigeria. But that was annulled because obviously the power in charge did not get their way. So fast forward 1999 up till 24 years till today, we're now having another election. So in order to understand the importance of the election, I'll first of all ask Brother Milton, what is the view from the United States with regards to this particular election?
From the United States administration, or from me sitting here in the United States as an African?
Two different perspectives.
I love the way you frame that question. Okay,
Two very different perspectives.
Let's say first your view and then the United States.
Okay, my view, based on what I've been reading so far, indicating that the elections are not a automatic slam dunk in terms of the party in power winning. That to me is a good sign. It means that the electorate, the voters, are actually being allowed to express themselves. And obviously that's what's been lacking in many of our African elections, where the elections are manipulated, they're controlled by the state, they control the conduct of the election, and they control announcing the results of the election as well. So I'm very happy to see that I have not seen many reports of election-related violence. So that is also a very good sign in a major country like Nigeria. Because Nigeria, as I said earlier, off camera, really represents a lot for Africans everywhere, not only on the continent, but in diaspora as well, with such a large population like that. Nigeria, if Nigeria sets good examples, then Nigeria also has the moral authority to go to other African countries who are messing up and saying, we can't tolerate this. And coming from a huge country like that, it's entitled to exert itself. You know, I'm not a big believer when African countries say, oh, don't mess in our internal affairs as an excuse, you know, to brutalize its own citizens. I don't support that at all. That's not the vision of what Pan-Africanism is all about. So I'm encouraged on one level, but on the other level, and I'll get to that later on, I am a believer that we need to have a much more radical approach in our solutions to Africa's problems. I'm not satisfied that we just have peaceful elections. We have a new person declared a president, and there's been minimal violence. So then we say, oh, this was a very successful election. No, that is not asking for enough. How are you going to transform Nigeria? And you know my own persuasion. I want a type of administration like a Thomas Sankara type that really is radical and does away with business as usual approach when it comes to education, it comes to agriculture, it comes to foreign policy, it comes to encouraging our people to become Africans and know that they can do for themselves, just like Sankara was doing. Will that be the outcome in Nigeria? I haven't heard any of the candidates talk like that. Right. So in terms of the U.S. outlook, my comment on that is very brief. The U.S. works with anyone that is willing to kowtow the line. So if you are seen as somebody who is pro-capital, pro-U.S. investments, support U.S. on the position on Ukraine, then of course you're automatic U.S. darling. So I don't pay much attention to who the U.S. supports in elections. I pay attention to who the voters on the ground support. So that's my response.
Okay. You mentioned the African theater, so which means we need to go to Sister Nduku to understand how the Africans on the continent, specifically Kenya, view the election, because Kenya is considered to be the third jewel in the crown for the British Empire. So how is the election being viewed in Kenya?
Yes, so first of all, just to mention, our former president, Uhuru Kenyatta, is in Nigeria as we speak, observing the elections, but I will invite both of you. I'm sure you'll have a lot to say about that. But just an FYI, Kenya is present in the Nigerian elections, observing. Okay. I'm not sure if Kenya has earned the moral ground to do so, but they're there. So I'm just going to quote a brother, Austin Bukenya. He writes for The Nation. The Nation is a paper here in Kenya. And in the Saturday Nation, he said, the heart of the matter is that wherever we live on this continent or in the diaspora, we should not be indifferent to the fortunes of Nigeria. So that's basically where my stance is. And it's good to see a fellow Kenyans, and I hope there are more Kenyans who feel this way writing this, because I'll say I have, because the elections are not over yet and the results have not been announced. I have hope. And I'm holding on to hope that Nigeria will lead us in finally being independent fully. And I hope the Nigerian people will stand against all attempts to prevent them from doing so. And I am looking forward, I am cheering them on, looking forward for a win that will benefit the people of Nigeria and Nigeria.
Okay. A bit of American background. Secretary Blinken was seen on social media advocating for Nigerians to, as he put it, Americans will not tolerate the election in Nigeria not holding, interference, any violence. America would not seek to pander to any shenanigans, as he puts it, as I paraphrase anyway. So that I was curious about. And the reason I say that is, here is the country with John Lewis's Voting Rights Act
Right.
sitting in Senate. And they have a majority in the Senate. And it's not being passed. And yet, we take this savior approach again
Right.
to the African continent to go and tell them, you, what's the word again? What's my famous word again? Yeah, you savages.
Right.
You need to do
Get
it.
it right.
You need to get it right.
Right. No, I agree with you. I think that commercial that he made was incomplete. And that comes with this arrogance, holier than thou approach. I'm surprised that nobody sitting there and watched that commercial after they made the promo said, Mr. Secretary, Africans are also watching what happens in the United States.
Right.
So let's not make it too, holier than thou. Let's have it a bit broader and mention the fact that we also had election challenges in this country. We know the importance because we also have instances here where our African American population discouraged from voting, right? They're trying to get them off the voter roll in some states. And these are issues that we are concerned with everywhere in the world, in the United States. And that's why we take an interest in Nigeria as well. If you put it in a perspective like that, it's a little more acceptable. But to come as if you're conducting free and fair elections in this country, so now you have the moral authority to be preaching to these natives, as the British used to call you, right? That is completely wrong, inexcusable. And I'm glad we're addressing that issue on this show. And let's be very frank. I asked my class the other day to give me an example of a democracy. And one student said, oh, right here, United States. I said, okay. So are voters really free to choose the best candidate? And is the best candidate able to really get his message out? Or does it depend on how much wealth and access you have so that you can have all those commercials? Is that to you democracy? Then the student started pondering, and could not respond. I said, I never thought of it that way. So those are issues we need to raise. I'm sure Sister Nduku has quite a
I definitely do, and I was being patient so that I do not interrupt you, brother. But my right,
your screen was going big and big and big.
I'll try at the end to come in on camera just to say hello to our community. Yes, but for me, when I saw that commercial, I was like, are you serious right now? Can you imagine an African country doing that during US elections?
Right.
Can you imagine
the
reaction from the media in the US? For me, I don't know if it is that they're not aware, or that they are aware but they don't care, or they're just so arrogant that they don't see how wrong this is. Who gave America the moral ground, the authority to speak on other countries' elections, to have a whole commercial telling another country what to do? So yes, I have other words that I cannot share live, but bad.
The viewers understand.
Horrible. Yes, they do.
Okay. So it will be important to state what each candidate needs to do to win the election. The president, okay, this weekend, the election being held is that of the presidency and the parliamentary election. In 2 weeks' time would be the gubernatorial elections and also the state assembly elections. So for the presidential election, to win the presidential election, the winner should have overall majority of the entire ballot cast plus 25% of the votes in 24 of the 36 states in the country to be an outright winner. If that doesn't happen, there will be a runoff between the first two. That has not happened in Nigeria, in Nigeria's electoral history. It might be the first time, but we'll wait and see.
And Conrad,
Yes.
so the idea for this formula is that obviously it's not enough for you to just have the majority of the votes. They want to see your national appeal as well.
Yes.
And that is why they want you to perform well in at least 24 of the 36 states as well.
Yes.
And that sounds like something that is actually a good idea. But for us who are not that familiar with the rules, can you elaborate on the importance of this and what are your own views on this rule?
Okay. The spread, the need for the spread in terms of a vote capture is important, not just to emphasize the appeal across the country, but also to mean that everybody had a say in picking you. Because it's not you putting yourself forward, it's the country picking you.
True democracy.
Yes. And so if the country goes the route of giving you 25% of each state, and bearing in mind some of these states are huge, some of them have enough population that will make states in United States bulk.
Right.
Lagos, for instance, is 16 million as at last count. That is almost New York. That's even more than New York. What am I saying?
Absolutely, it is.
That's more than New York. A place like Kano is bigger than Texas, if not more than. And in that space, there is a whole potpourri of people. Christians, animists, Southerners, Northerners, Middle Belters. It's because Nigeria, by its very nature, captures so much topography that you could go from one state and being in another weather pattern. That is how bizarre the place is. So the place is very welcoming, contrary to news reports. It has its challenges, but it's, like all, yes, but it's very welcoming. You could go from Lagos, postmodern, to a place like Zaria, where I schooled, which would take you back to colonial times. So the contrast would be a shock to the system. And then if you really want to go to pre-modern times, you could go to a place like Sokoto State, where you're now talking, you're talking pre the colonial era. So the farther you go away from places like Lagos, depending on which direction you go, of course, the farther you go from the comforts, as they will say, as you will say it. But for them, it works. Because
I have no problem with that. I think that's where Africa makes a mistake, that we always should emulate the West. And that for us is the definition of development and progress. When in fact, we have many people from the West running back to the tranquility of Africa and other parts of the world.
You can see Sister Nduku is there.
You see, we don't know where she's hiding. She's hiding where there are no probably elevators right now.
Exactly.
I am not.
And if she wants to, she can go to Nairobi, where they have all the amenities.
Exactly.
So please do not expose me. Thank you, brothers.
but brother, before this point you made, I want to go back to it for a second. You're talking about the spread of the votes, right?
Yes.
And the system you have. In fact, Nigerians have a better legitimacy to make a commercial than the American official.
I know where you're going.
Because look,
Yes,
you
please.
have in this country where the person who gets the majority of the popular vote could end up not being the president of the country.
True.
They
Exactly.
need a system like the one that you have right now in Nigeria, so that you have national appeal in all the parts of the country. So here they have a system where Hillary Clinton got more votes than Donald Trump, and he ended up being one of the most useless presidents that this country has ever had. So I wanted to get that out, but please, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Do tell us exactly how you feel, Brother Alimadi. Exactly how you feel.
But he's from New York, so yes. So the spread, the notion is to embrace whoever gets there as the president of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, rather than the president or the leader of a particular party. And so it's incumbent on the candidates to appeal to every nook and cranny of that country, so that you have that appeal. And what is also important, which we should not forget, that for the first time, the female participation in this election will be very crucial. And why do I say that? On the African continent, Rwanda has more of representatives in the parliament. Regionally, it's Senegal. Nigeria is a huge third, which is a shame, because close to 45% of the population is female. And go on.
I have my beef on that issue as well. I've noticed that of all the major parties that are running, the All Progressive Congress
Yes,
of Tinubu, People's Democratic Party
of
Atiku, and the Labour Party of Obi. I noticed that on the ticket, none of the tickets led by a woman. I noticed that on the tickets, none of them has a VP running mate who is a woman. So to me, this is very disappointing in a major country like Nigeria. And has there been a time in its history where a woman has been a leading candidate for the presidency? I mean, we cannot say they are not qualified, candidates. There are so many, leading major organizations around the world. So that's an issue that I think has been disappointing. But this is not a Nigerian problem, of course. It's Africa.
No, it's not. This is the first time the US too has had a woman.
Africa-wide problem. And we can say the same thing. In Kenya, I think Kenya actually had a woman vice presidential candidate on
we did
Raila Odinga, right?
Yes, we did. Ngilu, I believe Ngilu has run as a vice.
Right.
As a vice president.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes.
Yeah, but this is something that we need to press more in African countries as well.
I mean, it's important that point be made, because when Nigeria was going to gain independence, women were at the forefront of most of the struggle. People like Professor Bolanle Awe, people like what's her name?
Fela's mother, right?
Yeah, exactly. Funmilayo Ransom Kuti. So there are a whole host of them, But again, we live in a largely patriarchal society.
Correct.
And, over time that will change, because the demographics is actually pointing in that direction. So that is going to be something to look out for.
Very good.
Now, speaking about the elections, one thing is also important: the role of money.
Yes.
Why do I say money? Over time, money has been the bane of the Nigerian electoral system. It has been because of the level of the poverty. And why do I say this? In a country where they produce 2.2 million barrels of oil a day,
Wow.
sold on the world market at $77 a barrel. That's on a daily basis 154 million. 154 million a month. 154 million a day. Now, 154 million, 4.6 billion a month, 55 billion a year. Just on that basis alone. And yet people are still subsiding on a dollar a day, $1.90 a day.
Mm-hmm.
You'd begin to wonder when people then come in and offer people who are suffering money to essentially buy their votes, how can they make a conscious decision of who to vote for if the economic challenges does not allow them to make a justifiable decision? So the question is, how does the world view that in terms of not just the Nigerian election, but also the African situation with
No,
regards to democracy?
no, it's a major crisis. It's a major challenge, and that is when I say I am much more a supporter of transformative, revolutionary politics. It's because of some reasons like that. I was very encouraged when I saw this video that went viral from Ghana, where this politician, I forget, whether he's a member of parliament or he has, elective office. He had come back and he's distributing rice. And people were screaming at him, "Where have you been since we voted for you?" And they dumped the rice. They just dumped it, started opening the bags and trashing the rice. And they chased the guy who had to run back into his vehicle. You see? And so it means, Africans are aware of this too, that politicians are taking advantage of them. And in Nigeria, obviously, we know part of the reason, right? We know that the history of embezzling the oil wealth has been a tremendous challenge. Let me give you just an example. Norway is also an oil producer, and Norway has this sovereign fund, right, where they just save the profits from the oil. And they use that money to invest. They can even live on just the interest alone, right? It has $1.2 trillion in their fund with a T, 1.2 trillion. That means what? 1,200 times, right? Nigeria has 2.6 billion with a B in its sovereign fund, the money set aside. Think about that. That's even less than what I think, was it Abacha or Babangida stole? One of them stole more than 2.6 billion.
Oh.
And then let's go to, and I have to bring this up to rub it on the West. Libya, under Gaddafi, whom they vilified and eventually killed, Libya had 70 billion in its sovereign fund, just to invest, just to help its citizens, So I just wanted to bring that up as well, to give you an indication of why Nigeria has not lived up to its economic potential.
I was also going to add, as you speak of this, the economy, for me, as I was reading and doing the research on the elections, I was reading about Peter Obi. I think he is the Labour Party.
Right.
Correct. Sister, we lost Sister.
Sister, are you with us?
Wrong. But he, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Now we can.
Now we can.
We didn't hear what you said about
Yes, sorry about
initially.
that.
Go ahead. Peter
Yes,
Obi?
so Peter Obi, the one thing as far as the economy that caught my eye is he said that one of his main aims was to move the Nigerian economy from importing and consuming products to producing, consuming less, and exporting more.
Yes.
So I hope Peter Obi is going to be true to these words, because that's where we want to move Africa.
Yes,
But
absolutely.
that goes to oil production. And if Nigeria gets to the point where they're currently producing, but manufacture it and process it.
Yes.
That's a big game changer for Africa, right?
Yes,
and
sister.
Africa then distributes it. I mean, Nigeria distributes it within Africa.
Yes, in addition to manufacturing consumer goods as well instead of importing. So I support that 100%. But I have a question about Peter Obi as well. He said, like all the other candidates, that he would remove the subsidy. In Africa, it's called petrol. In the US, it's called gas. So he would remove the subsidy on that. What are your own views on that? Because if you remove the subsidy, I think so many people are going to, suffer unless you have like a efficient mass transit system, subway, buses, and all that to get people to work. So maybe you can talk about, what sister just raised in terms of production as well as subsidy.
Okay, so in terms of subsidy, the removal of the subsidy is going to be a double-edged sword. Why is that the case? Petrol is so cheaper outside Nigeria by the bordering countries. It's much more cheaper there as opposed to within Nigeria. So you now have a situation where Nigeria is, produces the oil, refines it, and then you bring it to less than what is available outside. So what then happens is nefarious distributor then move the money across. They move the fuel across the border. So you see the trucks going towards the border, and you're wondering, where are you going with it? So if you remove the subsidy, maybe the subsidy can then be used in providing stuff like education, better roads, infrastructure, and what have you.
Okay.
So that could be the diversification of the funds. In terms of import and export of goods and services, Nigeria is a net importer. And when I say net importer, I mean it imports more than it produces. And I had my face to say this, it produces some of the stuff that it actually produces, that it should produce. Stuff like food. With 40% arable land, agriculture has taken a nosedive, which used to be the reason the British came in there in the first place. They came in there for the oil palm, which incidentally in Nigeria, there were two varieties. There was the wild variety, and there's also, the cultivated variety, which, produces as much as the wild variety. So in terms of food production, that should not have been the issue. But since the discovery of oil in Oloibiri in 1958 and the availability of funds, people have moved their attention to oil-based economy. So what you now have is any dip in the oil markets immediately impacts everything else in the economy.
Yeah.
Because everything is tied to it. Nigeria should be a site for tourism because it's got beautiful beaches, beautiful historical locations, and those are just lying and going to waste. In fact, there is a place called Obudu Cattle Ranch. The place is on a plateau. The view from that plateau is absorbing. Millions have been wasted in building up that resort. If I tell you that resort is basically crumbling, you will be amazed.
That's unfortunate.
And this is where
it's the size of Disney, Florida.
They could actually learn here from Kenya. Kenya is one of the leading countries in Africa in terms of tourism revenue.
Yes.
This is where you get the Kenyan Tourism Board as consultants, and you pay them a hefty fee from the oil money, and they can actually help transform it. And this
collaboration.
Yes, absolutely. Hundreds of millions of dollars, for the economy. But this is where the leadership comes into play as well. When you talk about the food production. Remember, we did a whole show on
Yes, we
the
did.
politics of food.
Yes.
And I'm sure there are forces in the international economy that also is playing a role in preventing Nigeria from becoming food self-sufficient, because that's one of the things that is a prerequisite for international capitalism to exploit African countries, to make you
I,
food dependent. Go ahead, sister.
for Adesoji, just a quick request as far as subsidies go. We've talked about them before as far as farming goes, and in that case, we understand they're a positive thing. But for our audience, if you can clarify, what do you mean by subsidies when it comes to oil, the oil industry, and why would they be harmful if they're taken away?
Okay. In terms of the oil sector, it means the price of production. The Nigerians are not paying the full price of production. So if say it takes $77 to pull out a barrel of oil, when it comes to the Nigerian markets, they'll be paying for gas. Maybe normally they should be paying 10% of that. So $7. $7 in Nigeria would be that would be ridiculous.
Comrade,
So there is no way.
comrade,
Yes.
I think that's a bit too complicated. I think this is how I would tell the sister. If the price of a gallon of gas is $10, the government would pay $5 of that for you.
Correct. Yes.
So when you come to the gas station, you only pay $5. Why? Because the government
There
is
you
already
go. There you go. So this is
already
how
paid
the
5 for
regular.
you.
Thank you. So this
Yes.
is how the regular
you.
man understands how it's going to affect them, right?
Yes.
So in Nigeria, currently, the government has been paying a percentage of the price for gas for you.
Yes.
And what this individual, who in one hand is saying something good for the people, on the other hand is proposing something that is going to affect you negatively, you will have to now pay the full price for your gas.
Exactly. And the brother was saying it's a double-edged sword.
Yes, it is indeed.
And to add the nefarious side to it, there are companies that will go to central bank with letters of credit stating that they've provided oil to certain locations based on the allocation for that neck of the woods. And so what they're effectively claiming is they will get the full price.
Wow.
But then remove the subsidy. And that has been one of a running scam in Nigeria over decades. So
is there any candidate that is proposing something positive as far as oil production in Nigeria goes?
when you see, the idea of oil production in Nigeria is an entire show on its own.
True.
And we must have it.
It's an entire show on its own. But I'll just say this, just to give you a picture. Nigeria has 4 oil refineries. The oldest was commissioned in 1967. No, 1964. And the youngest in 1977. Why are they important? They've stopped production since 1986. They basically don't produce anything. So Nigeria draws the oil out of the ground, takes the oil overseas, gets it refined, and brings it, and then imports.
They buy it at a higher price.
Exactly. So can you see, since 1986, that has been happening. So that's why I say it's an entire show on its own.
Right.
So,
see, that's why they hated Libya as well. Because Libya, number one, had its own national oil company, not the big Western companies, And Libya refined its oil as well. And they got to decide how to spend their profits from the oil. And that is what Nigeria needs with a pro-Nigerian government, you see. But I also
keyword there, pro.
Yes, pro-Nigerian government. I also wanted to raise some questions about some of the candidates, right?
Yes.
So, for example, Bola Tinubu of the All Progressive Congress, that's the ruling party, correct?
Yes, yes.
So I was looking at some of the stories about him in background, and consistently you always hear this, and I know sometimes it also is very stereotypical.
Yes.
But my question would be to you, is there a smoke but no fire, or could there be some fire? Because you always read this sentence, plagued by allegations of corruption. Plagued by allegations of corruption in so many articles. And then I read one item where it's alleged that when he was a student in the US in the 1990s, that he allegedly had some interaction with some drug dealers. And as a result, he had to give up an account with $460,000 in the United States.
Are you sure you're not describing Donald Trump, Brother Almadi?
So that's where Comrade Adesoji can explain to us.
Quickly before our brother responds, just to point out, because we have been talking about the propaganda that the Western media.
Yes.
Yes. So notice how this individual sounds very much like we're describing a candidate in the United States, but they're using plagued.
Yes.
The plague.
Yes. And that's why I said, that could be stereotype. So I want you to explain to us,
Indeed, Brother Adesoji, go ahead.
Okay. Okay. Without maligning anyone, it's difficult to even begin to write a portrait for him. Because first, his background is a bit opaque. No pictures of his primary school education, none of his secondary school education. He did reside at some point in Chicago, United States. And that's where the story stems from. The drug story stems from. But I would like to move further into when he came into politics. That will cast a better light as to.
That's fair enough.
To understand. No, so that you understand who we have. He tends to craft a narrative based on what his needs are at any particular point in time. So when Sister Nduku draw parallels with him with Donald Trump, there's an element of truth in that. When he was governor of Lagos State, he governed Lagos State, which is my state, for 8 years. Would I say he did anything fundamentally that you can point to? No. In fact, he cornered every part of that state, to feed his personal ambition, which is what is now happening. He was also senator for 8 years. His wife was also senator in Lagos for 8 years. And question is, what is he going to do when he goes to the center? It's really difficult to say. But I'll leave with this. While he was governor, he did something which was very shady, just like Donald Trump. He formed a tax collection agency called Alpha Beta. And Alpha Beta is charging Lagos State at the time he was there, when he left, really the next tenure that came in after him, he was charging them 800 million a month, 800 million naira. So if you divide that by 700 naira, that will give you the amount of dollars we're talking about. Fast forward last year, May of 2022. Yes. the Lagos state government at the time then passed a bill that raised the threshold of what he can take off the internally generated revenue. The state generates about 35 billion naira every month.
Mm-hmm.
So he gets 2.5 billion every month. Yes, I know. Yes. It makes shady reading.
It's interesting you're saying that, because part of what I was reading about is the cash shortage in Nigeria.
So
currently.
I mean, we can put that down to him, but if someone corners that amount of wealth
Right.
on a monthly basis, we spoke about the influence of money in politics. It goes to show you the foundation and the bedrock of the All Progressive Congress is money.
Yes.
Because if you look through their manifesto, it's bland, and I'm being nice. So that is Bola Ahmed Tinubu in a nutshell.
And
So-
then what about? Go ahead, Susan. After you.
Yeah, we've heard Nigeria being referred to as the giant of Africa, Africa's giant, and we know of a few of us have analyzed, not speculated, analyzed, I'll call it, that if Nigeria stands up against imperialism and neocolonialism and finally gets its independence, it will be a leader for Africa and the others will follow. So do you think we're there? And if we're not there, do you think Africa can lead the way without Nigeria leading? Adesoji.
Thursday marked the 57th year of the overthrow of Kwame Nkrumah. Why is that important? Kwame Nkrumah came into Lagos in 1963 to visit his then friend at the time, Fela's mom. And he was asked at the airport, "Are you going to visit the Nigerian head of state?" And his answer, without missing a beat, was, "I don't speak to neocolonials."
Oh, that's sharp.
Did they let him get through?
I was about to ask the same question. You mean that
Did he make it into the country?
Yeah, he did.
Wow. Okay.
He did. He even held a press conference. He did.
And they didn't break diplomatic relations.
No, because they knew he was speaking the truth. And the truth in that lies in what will then happen in February 13, 1976. When the Nigerian then head of state, General Murtala Mohammed, was assassinated. Why was he assassinated? Because at the time, Nigeria was leading the country of the frontline states against apartheid.
Right.
And the British were circumventing the embargo on South Africa and providing oil. And to which the Nigerian head of state then, Murtala Mohammed, will nationalize Shell, British Petroleum actually. And that British Petroleum then became African Petroleum. And that didn't go down well with the British. And so when a coup came about, let's just say they looked the other way.
Right.
And he was killed. So Obasanjo that then came in could not obviously reverse that, had to then go with it. So everybody that had then come in afterwards had to play to that line. Now, I will end with this. In 1994, when General Ibrahim Mosi Babangida was leaving, after he had annulled the elections of 93. Why is that important? Who did he leave in place? He left Chief Ernest Shonekan. Chief Ernest Shonekan was the head of the UAC at the time, United African Company. And United African Company is a subsidiary of guess who?
Unilever?
Unilever.
Okay. Not surprised.
So what was he saying? I have handed it back to the owners of the country.
Right.
You deal with them.
Right. I'm glad Sister asked that question. As in fact, as the minute she asked it, before you respond, I'd made a note and I wrote down Nigeria was very critical in the anti-apartheid fight. Nigeria was a leader in that fight. Nigeria gave a lot of money to the ANC and even weapons to the ANC.
And
so
took in
Nigeria,
students.
When it puts its mind to something, it can do it collectively.
Yes.
So I go back to the question that Sister asked. Nigeria has not put its mind to saying we're going to transform our economy and become truly independent. Obviously, they can do it because they were supporting the anti-apartheid fight, something which was against the British, something which was against the US. So on that occasion, they said, we don't care about your policies. We're going to bring down apartheid. So if they could take the same attitude toward Britain and the US, saying, we don't care about your neocolonialism, we are going to transform our economies and benefit our people. And that's what we need. We need for them to show the same kind of resolve that they showed in fighting apartheid, in transforming Nigeria itself.
Unfortunately, we have leaders who were educated using the British model, which is devoid of critical thinking. So this election represents a chance to at least move in another direction.
Right.
It's not exactly going to be the panacea to all problems.
Right.
But it's probably a chance to move in an alternative direction.
I agree. You have to start somewhere.
Yes.
You have to start somewhere.
Yeah. I the one thing I was holding on to that I wanted to ask you, brother, and I cannot wait for both your responses on, is this idea that the AU is sent a delegation led by Kenya's former president Uhuru Kenyatta to observe the fairness of the elections in Nigeria. Brother Adesoji, please do us the honors of starting in response to this. How do you feel about this?
Well, it's an African brother who is coming to say hello. So, yes. Okay.
Did he bring bread and sugar?
Well, maybe he brought some flowers. I don't know about bread and sugar.
Go ahead.
His presence is key and also needed. And I'll say this. He is part of the establishment. He's a son of the establishment, the British establishment, that is. So he's just probably coming to check whether Daddy's house is as Daddy says it is. And politics on the African continent, maybe he's trying to come and see what, maybe it won't break into violence like it did when he ran against Riley Odinga. And is he going to contribute anything to the question? Nah, I don't think so. There's nothing unique about him. He speaks very well, and that's it. That's about it.
And he's very wealthy.
Very wealthy.
He will be, because his daddy left him. His daddy left him a lot of land that the British stole from.
Yeah, it's very wealthy family. I think his mother's maybe even wealthier, right?
There we go.
But on that same question that Sister has posed, and this is something I think we should probably do a show on. It's something that I have advocated for a long time. We need to have a parallel African Union of activists, of people that are not in government, maybe people who are reformist while they were in government, because that is how we can put pressure on the official African Union. So in a situation like this, for example, a People's African Union, once it lifts off and people can see that it has a big following and support, we would be able to send a delegation to observe the election as well. In fact, our observation and conclusion may start carrying much more weight than the official African Union and force them to do the right thing, because major political institution like this, they don't do the right thing until they're compelled. And so long as we are not compelling them, it means we are also failing,
Speaking of that compelling arguments, there are going to be 2 elections in the West African region that will determine whether France is finally kicked out of the Western region. One in Senegal and the other one in Cote d'Ivoire, both in 2026.
Very good.
If the elections go the way people in the region are expecting it to go, France might finally get finally gets given the green card, the red card from West Africa.
Yeah.
Because Mali and
independence.
Exactly. Because Mali, Burkina Faso, and Guinea are thinking of forming a federation. And Gambia is looking into the modalities of joining.
Very good.
So imagine if 4 countries form a federation.
That is our next show for sure. Not immediately, but it's one of our future shows. No, for real.
Yeah. So there's hope for Africa.
No, really. They're going back to the 1960s. That was the original idea, even in the 1960s, to start with a regional federation.
Yes.
And Nkrumah was involved in that conversation as well, with Modibo Keita in Mali and all those guys. So I like hearing that.
Yes. So, I mean, bringing Nigeria back into the equation, how it goes is important, because now you have 70% of the voting population are between the ages of 19 and 45. So if not this election, the next election most definitely.
Right. And I think the Labour Party of OB is depending on that youth vote as well.
There you go. And also building the framework of what would be the ideal political party going forward. Because the Atiku is 76, Tinubu is 70, Peter Obi is 61. So Peter Obi is much more nearer the population we just described, and the older guys are out of touch, so to speak, and part of the status quo. So it's going to be interesting reading in years to come. But this election will determine what path that is. Because if Obi forms a credible opposition or wins, Nigeria is in for a good ride.
And we can see some significant transformation.
Yes.
Instead of business as usual.
Yes.
The same system, just a new team. Same system, new team.
Yes.
Sister, are you with us?
I'm on mute. I am on mute. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Okay. Yes. So again, to the audience, as we move on to our question and answer section from the audience, we have a few questions in there. Just wanted to remind you all that we are looking for your support. We thank you for being with us here in conversation. Yeah. But in order for myself, Brother Alimadi, and Brother Adesoji to have more time and dedicate more time to this work, for example, a Nigerian election. I'm born and raised in Kenya, moved to the US. I don't know much about Nigeria. And so most of what I contributed, and as you noticed, I wasn't very talkative, was through research. So for us to have more time to do that research, we ask you to support us, and you can do so by either joining our Patreon family on Patreon at patreon.com/Kumbukeni, or you can subscribe. Again, we're looking for to increase our subscription on YouTube, because that then means that we start generating an income, and it will free us and give us more time to dedicate to the research. That is on youtube.com/@Kumbukeni1. Brother Adesoji from the audience, our sister Karen asked a question. She was asking, and maybe I should answer this one actually. She asked if people in Kenya, and then I'll go to give you the one that you can answer. Are people in Kenya following and talking about elections in Nigeria right now? And you and I were talking yesterday at our meeting in preparation for this, and you asked me to Google what was trending in Kenya at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And Nigerian came 11th in the trending, as I told you
Yeah.
at our meeting.
Yeah.
So in Kenya yesterday, of all the topics that were trending, the elections in Nigeria came 11th. I don't know if you have any comment before we move on to the next question, Brother Alimadi, Brother Adesoji. What do you think of that?
Yes, coming 11th is, with regards to the African election, is not shocking for the African audience because they never trained or never. When I say trained, I don't mean trained. The trend is not to look within your neighbors; it's often to look to the West. What is
Right.
trending in the West? Because if you look in the same trend, there'll probably be somebody doing a TikTok video and then
That's what came up a lot. Yep.
that gains more traction. So because we're not conversant about things that are around us,
Right.
our immediate surroundings, that is why it's easy for these guys to move in. And when I say these guys, the geopolitical forces
Right.
to move in and corner our assets before we realize. Before it used to be close your eyes and let's pray, and then you lose the land.
Yeah.
Now it's like, watch this video.
Yeah.
Don't worry, I'll deal with the rest. And that's it. So
Yeah. So to go back to sister, in terms of the other items that were trending, can I reliably believe that English soccer teams were trending higher?
I don't remember that. It was TikTok videos mostly.
Okay.
Yes, it was TikTok video. It was TikTok videos, which.
not
Yeah,
quite
because I
surprised.
wouldn't be surprised if there are more searches on British, football. They call it soccer teams and how they're performing.
And as you speak, actually, I will get the other question from our audience, and I'll do a nice quick search again for what is trending in Kenya. Brother Adesoji, our sister again asks, is there particularly good, accurate, and this is what Kumbukeni's audience comes, these are the questions, accurate, not just good, but accurate media, news source regarding the elections in Nigeria that you would recommend for our community?
Yes, that will be channelstv.com.
Is that the only one? Mm-hmm.
That's the only one you need. Believe you me, when I say that's the only one you need, that's the only one you need. And the reason I say that is he used to be a foremost journalist in Nigerian television. So, and he's now the CEO there. So he's never compromised on his journalistic standards. So,
Okay. Who owns the company?
John Momo.
Okay. We need those kind of outlets in Africa. So thank you for that question from the viewer.
I mean, you could watch the Nigerian television as well, but hey, take it with a pinch of salt.
Back to you, sister.
Yes. So I'm Googling now and trying to figure out what the trending is. But as I go down the line of questions,
while you frame the line of questions, I would just like to
Mhm.
add this geopolitical aspect to it. Why is Nigeria's election? Why is it important to the world? The world is currently engaged in Afrika, as I will call it, in Eastern Europe, in Ukraine. One of the primary reason at play there is access to resources, oil being one of them, and gas. Nigeria is the second largest producer of oil on the continent after Angola. If the Nigerian government decides we would only sell to those we choose to, you can imagine what will happen. The price of oil would skyrocket. And because Venezuela's oil is just coming back onto the markets, Iranian is completely out of reach. Russia's is out of reach. So it means the West would rely on places like Nigeria and Angola to produce said oil needs. That's one. Two, is if trouble breaks out in Nigeria, it will make very grim reading for that neck of the woods. Why? Nigeria is 200 million. The next country to its population wise is 15 million. Ghana is maybe 50 odd million. So if there's a refugee crisis, none of Nigerians will just completely overrun the countries next to them. That will create instability that will take centuries to repair. So that's one. That's two. The third and the most important is, even if Nigeria is going to break up, and at some point it would, because it's just too big, even if it is going to do so, it needs to do so on the agreement of the people within it, not from the bidding of the people outside of it. So that is why this election is very important. Because if we can decide who our leaders would be, then subsequently we can decide how we're governed. So that is why this election is very important.
So as you're speaking,
yes,
a question came to my mind.
Yeah.
Because knowing from the experience of Uganda, where, it's completely hopeless. The dictator appoints the election commission, and they essentially, are on speed dial with him, right?
Yes.
They announce the results. How dependent is the election commission in Nigeria? And how reliably, how confident is the population in the integrity of the election commission and the results that they're going to?
Well, the election commission are appointed by the sitting government. So yes, obviously people might frown on it, but the INEC, as it's known, the Independent National Electoral Commission, Nigerian Electoral Commission, has not, has been by and large impartial.
Okay, that's very important.
Very, very, very impartial. The problem is before the results gets to INEC, not after it gets to INEC.
From the polling centers, okay.
Yes.
Understood.
So if it gets to INEC untainted, the results will be untainted.
Understood.
So it's
good point.
Yeah. So it won't be challenged. Yes.
And I am saddened and disappointed, not surprised, to confirm, Brother Alimadi, that you are right. Soccer is trending more than the Nigerian election. We have Newcastle, Chelsea. It's unbelievable. Africa.
I know my people.
Listen. The well-being of Africa is, I'm looking at it all the way to 50, and I think here, this is a Twitter trend. The trend at 33, Peter Obi comes up.
What?
No, I think this is where creative journalism should also come into play. Right. When we are talking about these football teams, we should also throw in some drops about the election.
Let's do that. Let's hashtag Manchester United Peter Obi. Manchester United Nigerian election. Like,
what is going creative?
What is it going to take for Africans to care about their
we have
well-being?
to be creative.
Brother Adesoji, do you have anything to say about this?
No, I mean, if the American elections is coming up, most people will tell you who the candidates are on the continent. They know who the president is. They know who is running, why they're running. Again, it goes to show that we don't take pride in what is ours. And I mean, I like football myself, but I mean, I've not really watched it now for a year or so. I mean, it's not because I don't like it or I've fallen out of love. It's just because priorities just.
Of course, you have to prioritize.
Yeah, exactly. And you also have to, excuse me, you also have to understand that sometimes these things are just distractions.
Yeah.
They're distractions. We have fascism moving in, creeping in Europe and the United States. So it's important that we are aware of what is happening on the continent.
Yep. Diversion tactics,
Yeah, it's important. It's important.
Brother, I have another question, actually.
Yeah, go on.
On the issue, and this is something that has always come up as well, in terms of the compensation for elected representatives in Nigeria. I remember a few years ago, the expenses of senators was about $38,000 a month. I mean, the salary was, maybe about $2,000, which is still high in our country. Let's say today the per capita income is actually $2,000 and something. And that's a monthly salary, $2,000. But forget that. The expenses almost $40,000. And we know they probably use that essentially like additional salary, That's more than $400,000. That's almost $500,000 a year per senator.
Expenses.
Yep. That's a lot of money.
Okay.
Your thoughts?
Hold your seats. You're going to get another shocker. In 2016, 50% of the national budget went towards the National Assembly.
Wow. No.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
So where's the money for developing the country going to come from?
Well, we'll scrimp.
That's tragic. That is really sad.
That is why, when it comes to electioneering, it is a do or die affair. It's a do or die affair, to the point where the average salary in Nigeria in the civil service is supposed to be $30,000. So I said $30,000. Sorry, I wish 13,000 naira. If you divide that by 700, you get a sense of what the take home is in dollars. If you divide that in maybe 1,000, you get a sense of what that is in pounds. So
I didn't even think about this question before, Adesoji, but as you speak and as I remember the ridiculous commercial by the United States through their Secretary of State, Blinken, my question to you is, why now? Why? This is the first time we're seeing this. Why are they doing it now? Why is the United States meddling in this way by putting out an advertisement?
Because it is important.
Oil.
Exactly. Geopolitically, it's important. If a big if Tinubu wins, it's business as usual. British control that sphere of influence. If Atiku wins, I shudder to think what will happen. The guy will sell the country. It's possible. If Obi wins, Obi with his background in studying in America, the company will come in. It's going to be a free for all. If Obi then says China can no longer take the oil, and China says, you know what? Okay, I'll go outside and I'll go and start fomenting trouble from the outside. And they tell their British that, listen, it's no longer business as usual. We now run the roost. What then happened to Murtala Mohammed might just happen to Obi, but I pray it doesn't. But that is just me thinking with geopolitics, how it's played out.
Yeah.
But these guys don't play fair.
They don't. See, and part of the problem is
they don't.
As Nkrumah said, we as individual countries, we are not strong enough to demand our full sovereignty and be able to protect it without losing our lives,
Yes.
Like poor Thomas Sankara. To operate in that sphere next to hostile Ivory Coast, it was quite challenging.
Yes.
And that's why when he was visiting Ivory Coast, the leadership insisted that he not address the youth of the Ivory Coast. because they knew there was a potential of him inspiring the youth to take over in Ivory Coast. And then you have a system similar to Burkina Faso, which of course would then enhance his chances of surviving,
Yes.
in Burkina Faso,
I mean, he prefaced his regime very well when he went to United Nations. His first statement: "I come from a country of 7 million people, men, women, and children, who have refused to die of hunger."
Yep.
There you go. So, question is, do we have leaders who can say it the way it is without, using diplomatic speak?
And not just that, Brother Adesoji, African people, can you please refuse to die of hunger?
Yep.
Can we all refuse to die of hunger and push our leadership to go and advocate for us?
Yeah, that's a T-shirt that Kumbukeni needs to put out. No, really.
Let's refuse to die of hunger.
Yep,
I refuse to die of hunger.
And then at the bottom, said by Thomas Sankara.
Sankara, yes.
That's going to be one of our first merchandise.
Yes.
You're providing.
No, for real.
You're providing.
Nduku wants us to do this full time. He's going to take a T-shirt like that.
You're providing food for thought there.
Yeah.
No, I mean, it is imperative that happens, because 1999 to the present time now, that's 24 years. There are kids that grew up within that timeline that don't have functionable educational systems. The schools are dilapidated. The roads are horrible. Poverty is sky high. Hunger ravishes the land. What do we do?
Oh, sorry. I mean, Karen just put a note that I'll buy one T-shirt for somebody.
I was about to say, Brother Limadi, that reaction to what Adesoji said.
Sorry, brother. Sorry.
Yeah, I was like, I didn't say anything that excitable, So, it goes to say that hopefully this election acts as an opportunity to reset the country. Sometimes even out of a defeat, you understand that, yes, there is work to be done. And it's practical. It's because Obi was considered to be the third runner, because he actually left the People's Democratic Party to go and run on the ticket of Labour Party. Yes. So people did not think he was going to be a credible candidate, or when I say credible, a formidable candidate, I mean. But the mere fact that he's pushed the envelope this far, that he becomes the rallying cry for the youth, means the status quo, means the status quo is in trouble.
Yeah, something is really going on.
If he had a structure below the presidency, you'd be talking of a real credible challenge. A real credible challenge.
So either way, he's on that stage now, regardless.
He's on the stage, yes. He's on the stage.
Next election, if he doesn't take it this time, it's likely that in the next vote.
There you go. So he has lit the torch.
Right.
And
all right.
Then,
so brother, I have to ask you also, in the last election, somebody we're very familiar with, my friend actually, the publisher of Sahara Reporters.
Yes.
Sure. I was hearing a lot about him in the last campaign.
Yes.
He was very active on social media and all this. Then I know they were arresting him and harassing him. How's that sort of affecting him severely in this election?
Well, like you said, he has people who listen, but the spread is not there. So, I mean, he was a student when I was a student. So you will think that people like me would have bought into what he was proposing. But the reality of the people in that space called Nigeria is not reflected by what he's talking about. Or at least to a large extent is not what they're seeking. So it's a bit
Brother
difficult.
Adesoji,
Yes.
quickly as you say that, a question comes to mind, because you mentioned your classmates and people of your age group, and it would be good if they had the same mindset to support brother the candidate Obi. Do you think it's because that they have moved out, they are now in the diaspora, that this is happening? The people who have this awakened mindset are not living in Nigeria, not participating in these elections?
When I say awaken, it's sometimes there's a saying in my part which is you can't fight a revolution on an empty stomach. It's not gonna work.
Yes.
And so yes, they understand what you're saying, but at the same time, you know what they say in the American politic, it's bread and butter issues. So what are the bread and butter issues? The bread and butter issues are security, poverty, and then just access to a better standard of living.
Yeah.
You're not going to gain that by just words. So that would come from people actually saying, you know what, I think you've got a credible plan. Let's see how it works out. And also, there are parties who are running presidential candidates, but without parliamentary candidates, without gubernatorial candidates. So it goes to tell you that all they have is the head. They don't have a body.
Okay. Structures on the ground.
Is there a reason, quickly, is there a reason why that is? Why would a party not have the whole structure?
Because to build a structure in Nigeria is not just, first and foremost, you need people who understand, who have the same vision as you have. And so if they don't have that, the next thing they're looking for is incentivization. By that, I mean, we go back to the issue of money.
Right,
Resources. So that's the case.
Yeah. So as we are ending, I decided to come through with my video. Hopefully it's gonna last as we say goodbye. But
yes,
with a true image of me and one of, just in case you don't get enough of me, right behind me. But I was going to reach out to our community and just say to you that do join our Patreon family. Why do I say this? I'm saying this because coming up soon with both my brothers and I traveling, I'm on the continent now, we're going to be sharing much more knowledge on Africa that we cannot share in the public. And this is a space just because of privacy reasons and that. So this is the place where you will be able to learn more about African culture from our perspectives, from our real lives. We'll be sharing a lot of those videos there to our family on Patreon. So do follow us on Patreon, patreon.com/Kumbukeni. We would love to provide this information and knowledge to everyone. That is the goal eventually for Kumbukeni. But at the moment, security is key, privacy is key, because our world is not ready yet. It's not, it doesn't have the mindset of well-being for the collective. Everyone is fending for themselves, just based on our conversation here on Nigeria. So patreon.com/Kumbukeni. You can also support us on YouTube at youtube.com/@Kumbukeni1. Brothers, any last words on Nigeria? Quickly, before you say, I'm going to say one more time, our brother, Austin Bukenya, wrote a piece on the Saturday Nation in Kenya. And he says, wherever we live on this continent or in the diaspora, we should not be indifferent to the fortunes of Nigeria. That is my call to action for all Africans. Brother Adesoji Alimadi.
Aluta continua, as Samora Machel used to say.
I would just leave that the young Nigerians are in a unique position to chart a new course for the country and onwards and onwards.
Asante sana.
All the best to Nigeria. Let's hope it turns out well, right?
Yeah.
Kwaherini.